Thank you, Teresa. So welcome everybody to this session for the recording. To those of us joining on the recording, welcome. So I know that I'm not going to do Aesha and Dean justice in the introduction, but for anybody not familiar with their work, they are co-founders of the Urban Mindfulness Foundation based in Newham, East London. And they've been practicing mindfulness since 2009. And they co-facilitate many workshops, drop-in sessions, and specially designed to broaden awareness and understanding of equality, diversity, and inclusion. They are also successful entrepreneurs, having successfully run their own businesses in environmental consultancy and risk management for 15 years. And they're both, I don't know how they have time, but they both are completing master's degrees in mindfulness studies, and that's imminent. So we're even more grateful that you've broken away from that work, which I know is intense at the moment. And they're also looking specifically at trauma-sensitive, inclusive mindfulness trainings, contemplation, reflection, and interactive exercise, and insight dialogue. And the other element which they kindly shared with me was that as life partners, they enjoy family life with their two daughters and family dog, where together they spend a lot of time creating, debating, exploring, and generally making good trouble. Now that I'd really like to explore. I would really like to explore that, but we should probably stick to the theme initially anyway. So do feel free to jump in with anything that I've missed, guys. But once again, thank you for joining us. Is there anything I have missed before I ask our first question?
No, not at all. Just maybe occasionally we find a moment to sleep.
Yeah, I'm not convinced by that.
Oh.
No, that was great. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank
you very much.
It's wonderful, and I'm just really grateful that you're here with us. So the first question that we talked about, really to introduce your work really to the community is what are you doing? Tell us a bit more about this work that I described as best I could. But yeah, tell us a bit more about the work that you're doing.
This is the bit where we go, who's answering? Who's answering? Yeah, so I guess our journey started, as you mentioned, in 2009. And we've done lots of different courses, lots of different workshops. And for us, what we found was that there was interesting moments in these sessions and on these courses where there felt like there was a bit of a freezing out with our lived experiences. And this seemed to be a repeated thing that we discovered. So that's just giving you a bit of a background of our experiences in these different courses. At the same time, really realizing that mindfulness is great. It's doing so much for us. It's helping us to be, more aware, be more with our experience. But the experience itself in reading these sessions, there's some complexities there. So that was something that we became really aware of. And I guess over a period of years of developing our own practice, also going through the training of teaching, and then going on to the MSc course, where we could really look at mindfulness in a lot more detail and with critique. It felt as if we'd suddenly been given permission to have a closer look at what was going on. So I guess for us, and what I didn't actually mention is along the way, we were really kind of given the encouragement, we think you should teach, we think you should teach. And we were a bit like, nah, that's not for us. But, when we really realized how much benefit there was for ourselves and how much could benefit other people, it felt a bit like, who are we not to share it? This feels a bit selfish if we don't share it. So we, raised a bit of confidence, said, okay, we'll do the teacher training, and just naturally progressed on to doing the master's degree. So for about 6.5 years now, we've been running a local community group so that we could, make mindfulness a bit more accessible in our local community. We mentioned at the beginning of the session with Andrew and Teresa that Newham, where we are based in East London, it's one of the most diverse boroughs in the country, but also one of the most poverty-stricken. So for us, we've got our own business, so we are quite fortunate in that way. So we said, well, what about if we put these sessions on, community sessions, where people can come and donate as they wish, if they can, but if they can't, they're still welcome anyway. So we try to approach things slightly differently. and really thought there's something else that we can look at here. So I might give Dean a little chance to speak now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just really, really glad to be here sharing with all of you. And yeah, I think the thing for me was um, being in some of these mindfulness spaces and some of the teachings that were coming, being offered. I could, they were quite challenging actually to sit, and listen to. This particular one, which was, this use of, when we talk about mindfulness, everyone sort of says it's maybe less fashionable now, but it's, oh, this monkey mind, and I used to sit there thinking, what the hell do they not understand the experience of what Black people go through? I grew up watching bananas being thrown on football pitches and wanted to be a footballer and all of that. So it was really quite a problem. And most of the meditation practices was fundamentally about bright white lights. And, everything was very dark and the problems. So it really affected me, actually. I've got to be honest. But I knew there was something special about mindfulness all at the same time. I knew there was something special and it was really helping me. So the key was, how do we work with this and make it suitable for people who look like us? And of course, being in the borough, one of the most diverse boroughs in the UK, when we opened our gates 6 years ago and said, well, look, just come along and practice, we had a real eclectic mix. And people were coming along saying, can I practice this? Do I need to be Buddhist? And people were coming along saying, whoa, I'm not going to be, what if I make my mind go blank? What's going to come in? There was all sorts of strange, really, but genuine critiques from minorities who didn't understand what secular mindfulness was about. So again, we were forced in a position where we had to make the teachings adaptable, relatable, but in a way that embraced everyone for who they are. And that's how really the journey started for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I ask a question, if it feels comfortable? Particularly, you mentioned feeling frozen out. You'd be comfortable to say a little bit more about
that? For me, anyway, I'll jump in. For me, there were a few times. For example, I give an example. It's a lived experience. So another example is, I don't know how many of you are aware of there's a practice called the grape exercise. And, you it's a little bit like the raisin exercise. And how did it get here today? And we did that practice. I did this practice. First time I did this practice, it was a beautiful practice. We were the only people of color in the room. And the story was, how did you get here today? And I actually shared the gratitude that I had for my ancestors and the struggles that they've gone through, and the fact that I'm here amongst all these people, even online now, being able to do this is amazing for me. But that point, the room sort of froze because I spoke about my ancestral lineage and the fact that it is a colonization and slavery that's really got me here. But that's okay, and I was saying that's okay. And it didn't go down too well just to share that. There was a deathly silence. And in the end, actually, what someone said was, because there was some Holocaust work in that practice as well, which is really important, which is why I related to it so much, actually. And I use that practice all the time. Someone in the group said, well, maybe we should put some starving children from Africa in our slides. So I just froze, totally shut down. It was traumatic. And I mean, there's endless stories of this, to be fair. You know, it's so many things within mindfulness that make it traumatic for minorities, actually.
Thank you so much. Aisha, was there anything that you wanted to add to that, or?
I absolutely can, but I will try and keep it brief. Yeah, I guess one experience that I do actually recall is actually studying part of compassion. And, you know, when we look at, for instance, reification and over-identification, I completely understand that, you know, when we buy into what we internalize. So a question, again, we're both on the course, a question that was raised was, what happens when our suffering is not self-induced? It's not because we've internalized it, it's actually an external experience, a bit like racism. Again, there was a freeze out, a bit of a, no, it's how you're relating to it kind of moment. And that kind of really kind of cut deep. And there was a real sense of, this isn't my suffering, this is pain. And it's pain that's being induced. So I think for me, what I really felt there was a lack of acknowledgement in the facilitation of the experience. And, you know, this sense of really validating someone's lived experience and just trying to make sense of it as part of a course. So I think for me, what I've realized more and more is a lot of the times trainers or facilitators feel that if they don't know the answer, they still answer something instead of saying, you know, I really am not sure. You know, sometimes it's okay to say, I'm not sure. Maybe someone else can, you know, offer some support or advice here. But when we get a sense of, oh no, it's just your problem, that's not always the answer. That's not a good look for someone that's experiencing something. So there was a real concern about, you know, how we experience our lived experiences and then share them. So that's something that's really kind of stuck, that really made us feel like we need to do something about this. Not that we're trying to shame or blame anyone, but we need to look at this with maturity for compassion for everyone. You know, we don't have to understand everything, but maybe we can just have a bit of humility to look.
I'm so glad you mentioned the H word. I think that there's, as you were saying that, I was just reflecting on when I'm teaching, there is this sort of, well, I'm the teacher. And it takes a degree of humility to go, yeah, I don't know the answer to that. And there's a lot of fear with that, isn't there? There's a lot of fear that comes with that. So yeah, learning humility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get it too. You know, it's not like we are exempt from that. Completely get it. But sometimes it's okay to just name that. You know, it doesn't make us less professional.
No, it more so, I would argue. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing those personal experiences, which you know, obviously aren't easy. So hugely appreciate that. So the next question sounds slightly ridiculous because it's, why is this important to you? But let me reframe that a little bit, because I think we've heard a little bit about that. But what would you describe as your vision, if you like, for your work? So obviously your lived experience has influenced your approach, the efforts that you're putting into this, the time and so forth. But what's your vision for your work?
Yeah, really nice question, actually. Thank you for that. I feel myself, again, mindfulness is absolutely connected with compassion as well as insight. But I feel that there's sometimes a conflict with compassion, and it just means, you know, being nice to people that we like. You know, what about those that are a bit challenging, or we have challenge with, or bring challenge to us even? You know, it's not to say that that doesn't happen. So I guess for us, we've really been looking at reframing things. You know, we developed a program called mindfulness-based inclusion training. So there's a whole program, and what that really is about is going beyond the secular. You know, it's still a secular course, but we're being explicitly inclusive. It doesn't matter what background you come from, what faith you have, what belief system you have, but we can still include you as part of this practice. So an explicit welcome feels really necessary, especially in the community that we're in. And really looking at compassion as, you know, it's not this nice thing that we just apply and be kind. It's because suffering exists. You know, how do we meet challenge and show up for that, not shy away from it? And for us, inclusion is about compassion. It's a broader perspective of compassion. It means, you know, looking at who may we be excluding and not really seeing that we're excluding. So we're asking those important questions. Can we do any more to include people? Is there education that we need to have around including? So for us, you know, that is definitely a focus for us. Yeah. Don't know if you can come in.
Yeah, what's in my mind, it's quite, I'm thinking about the workplace and how that sort of lands in the workplace. But for me, it's about radical inclusive love. And that's as simple as I can put it. It's about compassion. It's we have a slide which we might be able to show you, but it is about compassion, inclusion, mindfulness, love, insight. You know, it really is humility, wisdom. That's what it's about. And it's about getting to know what it is to be human. What is it to be human? And having these boundaries that we know we got to keep ourselves safe. And it's about inviting us to dance and be in that space where, okay, sometimes we have to take one step or two steps, two shimmies back. Sometimes we need to move forward, but it's about being in the dance, the full dance of life, the full, you know, John Kabat-Zinn says the full catastrophe living. We say the full dance, and that's embracing all of who we are and all of what we meet. So our definition, you know, that was another thing we had to challenge the definition, because we make good trouble, like we said. And you know, our definition is a little bit different, because we found this non-judgment thing and this without preference thing was, I'm not sure how helpful, we weren't sure how helpful that was. We were more interested in becoming aware of our judgments, aware of our preferences, just like we're aware of anything else, bringing our awareness to judgment, and then meeting that with kindness, meeting that with care, meeting that with humility. And through that process, we can bridge across the boundaries that we might see. So that's the fundamental underpinning of why we're doing what we're doing. So it really brings that qualitative aspect of mindfulness to the fore. It's not just about attention and awareness training. It is about cultivating those qualitative aspects of kindness, care, and purposely moving into a space of bridging, you know, rather than separating.
Wonderful. A couple of reflections, if I may, and this is where I completely take advantage of the fact that I'm the chair, and I will promise everybody will, you know, I will be quiet. But just one, I heard a beautiful expression, which I'm sure others have heard elsewhere, is that non-judgment doesn't mean non-discernment, and that we can discern, and that's such a critical point. And so we can notice our judgment, and then what do we do with it? What do we do about it?
That's right.
Absolutely love that. And also, when you were talking about compassion, this idea of the warrior nature of compassion, that compassion isn't twee or trite, it is anything but. It's a warrior quality in my humble opinion. I will stop, I'm the chair, but yeah, I'm loving it.
Yeah.
So did you want to share that slide, or
maybe we can share a couple of slides really quickly. How let's share screen, see if I can share that. Can you see that?
yeah, it's just
Okay.
coming up. There we go.
So
We could quickly move on from this slide.
yeah,
They are great picks.
one of the things that also I just spend a couple of seconds on this slide is the diversity of mindfulness is its beauty. Now, you know, one of the things we say is, we've all know, and we've probably all been taught, mindfulness is an innate quality. It's within each of us. That means, for me anyway, that it has 7.5 billion different expressions, which means it's diverse in its nature And I think sometimes we can try and pigeonhole it to a particular thing, a particular definition, a particular purpose. And I think that that prevents its agency. But, you know, we could spend much more time on that, but that's one of the slides there. This slide here is, you know, there seems to be this problem of, and this really goes into the heart of mindfulness in the workplace, really. Are we training the individual to cope with the stress? Or are we looking at the water in which we swim? And, you know, many of you have probably heard that analogy of, you know, two fish swimming in the water. The adult fish swims past the two fish and says, "How's the water today, boys?" And the two young fish go, "What the hell is water?" And it's that same thing. This is what we're trying to bring to mindfulness is, okay, yeah, we can look after ourselves, and that is fundamentally important. But there is this water or culture that we swim in. And what about when the water gets toxic? You know, just like a fish tank, how do we, if you know about fish in fish tanks, you can't really change all of the water at once. You need to do it in stages, else the fish will die. So this is about looking at the water and the culture that mindfulness sits in, or the culture within our workspaces, and using our contemplative practice to really see and then bring forth some change. The slide that I did want to show you, I think, is quite
skipping along.
This one. Go. So this is what what we've done is really about. It's about compassion. It's about inclusion or inclusive. It's about being radical and shifting something, making the qualitative aspects really at the forefront and the path to liberation. It's about love, which is an interesting word. It's about mindfulness, of course. It's about insight, wisdom, and humility. That is what it is in a nutshell. And that's really holding that space of uncertainty, not being sure, not being, you know, having to know it all, knowing that we're going to make mistakes. That's also okay as well. And then creating containers where we can have the challenging conversations coming from the heart space.
That's beautiful. There's no other word for it. I was trying to search for another word, but there isn't. So moving into practicalities, and you've mentioned workplace a few times, and I'm very grateful for that. You know, this is the Mindful Workplace community. So how do you see this applying in the workplace, and perhaps how are you doing this work? How are you translating this fantastic vision into practicalities, and what are you up to? What good trouble are you causing?
Well, we've created an 8-week course, which also can be done over in a monthly format as well. And those programs are based, it's a very flexible program, and it's about, it can look at any form of identity-based harm. But ultimately, it is about taking care of ourselves. So we're hoping that most people have done sort of the basic mindfulness, MBSRs and MBCTs and so forth. But the question is, what do we do next in our workplace? What do we do next? So this really is about bringing our practice and this sense of contemplation and being grounded to the social waters we swim or the workplaces. And then we ask ourselves the 4, you know, key questions really. And we look at, okay, what's the hegemony here? You know, where is the power held? And are they interested? Is this something that's just a side dish that's given to the staff and in the cleaners, you know, or is this something that the management and the hegemony are embracing? So that's because once you get hold of the, if you like, the management and they buy in, then we can start to make cultural change. Then we can really start to change the water in which we swim. The other thing that we're really looking at when we're talking about how our mindfulness practice can move into the social space is to look at the signs and symbols, is how Stuart Hall describes it in cultural studies. And what are we using to promote mindfulness? Is it a typical sort of, the image that pops into my mind is either a lady on the beach in sort of half dressed, or a chap at the computer with his legs crossed in some kind of Mahamudra pose or something. Oh, that sort of what are we using as the signs and the symbols to promote and to create and to recruit? That's really key and fundamental. And the other ones, I don't know if you wanted to come in. Right.
So discourse and language, how are we using our words? How are we communicating with ourselves and also with others? What's the shared language that we buy into and accept between ourselves? Does it need to be challenged, critiqued? Does it need to change? So, when we're looking at, one example that Dean gave earlier, for instance, in mindfulness, the term monkey mind, it's been really prevalent in a lot of the courses that we've done. But without that acknowledgement or understanding that it can be offensive, why would it change? So, when we are able to look at things in a bit more, with a bit more space for the participants to give feedback, then we can start to address things like the language. Because if we're not aware of what needs to be changed, we can't really change anything. So, being really open to the wisdom that's in the room as well, and the lived experiences to help us see what discourse is necessary, what needs to be dropped, what's the language that we're using. So that's one aspect. Again, when we're looking at diversity, for instance, and inclusion, the fourth point of culture that Stuart Hall talks about is representation. But with that representation, it doesn't just mean, we just need a much more diverse board. We just need to have more people in the company and make it look good. It's a lot more than that. What happens when we are not culturally adapting so that everybody can feel comfortable there in that space? It's not about integrating so that people fit into something that may be broken in the first place. It may need reconstruction. So it's not just about representation. It's saying, what do we need? And maybe what do we need to break down and rebuild? It's this idea of clearing weeds and planting seeds. We need to make space for that. We can't just integrate. So the representation, I get it. And lots of people are really interested, especially over this last year of, looking at inequality. People are really keen to, represent and be more inclusive. But how we do that requires a bit of breakdown first so that we can reconstruct.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. It's, a saying that popped into my mind from Cornel West. And he says, we've had enough black and brown faces in high places. This is not about just representing or reproducing. And Stuart Hall talks about this in great detail. Representation is not just about reflecting the same. We could come on and I deliberately wear hoodies, for example. I'm a mindfulness teacher. I deliberately wear hoodies just to shake it up a bit. But it's not about reflecting what's been before or just, repeating a reproduction. It's about reconstruction and working together. And the reason why that's so important, because it allows each of us, no matter who we are, where we're from, to be authentic. That's the key. If it's a reproduction or a reflection, we are following the same patterns again and again. It's like, we talk about mindfulness and habits, and it's the same thing again. Yeah, we're doing the same thing again and again. It's about a reconstruction that allows each of us, whoever we are, wherever we're from, whatever our preferences, to be authentic. And it means a reconstruction.
There's so much optimism and positivity about what you're describing. It just feels to me like such an exciting future you're setting out, if I can say that. It really does. So I'm going to restrain myself because you can see, can't you? I want to. I'm not going to. I'm going to stop. I'm going to suggest, is there any other comments or thoughts that you haven't had a chance to explore before we go into our breakout groups, guys?
Yeah. Time flies, doesn't it? I mean, at the baseline of our program is this idea of Ubuntu. Has everyone heard of Ubuntu philosophy? So I am because we are is at the baseline of our program. I'll just maybe, have I got time to show a couple of slides? This one. Let's try this one. Okay, so, oh no, that one's not working now. Technology. Let's try again.
These are the moments where I always threaten to sing. I haven't had to do it yet.
Yeah. There we go. So. Can you see that?
Yeah.
See that? Oh. Oh. Why did it switch back?
You might just have to leave it on that setting.
Okay. Let's try one more time. Okay. So this around the program, the idea of Ubuntu is, and it really comes from the work of Shola Richards as well. And he talks about mindfulness in the workplace, or you know, how we can create high functioning workplaces. And this idea of Ubuntu, there's 8 keys of Ubuntu.
But firstly, we might be able to just say, I'm just going to sneak in there, what it actually means. So the philosophy of Ubuntu is I am because we are. A lot of mindfulness practice, you know, we're looking at ourselves. So this is really about how I am with others. I can't exist without anybody else, and vice versa. We are social beings that are not living in isolation. So just to give clarity there, I am because we are.
Yeah, and within Ubuntu, the 8 keys to high functioning communities, we look at accountability, you know, and we look at attitude. And I'll say a little bit about accountability, because often accountability in our minds can mean blaming and calling people out. And really, when we're talking about accountability with an Ubuntu philosophy, it's really about taking ownership. How am I involved in this? Where is my role in this? As opposed to blaming others. And I think that that's, again, really important. You know, in a high functioning business community, they're quick to own it and slow to blame. And that's where we really where we want to be, quick to own and slow to blame. And I think that's really, really important. The other one is attitude. And again, you know, even when in our mindfulness practice, when we turn up to a mindfulness session, what happens when the facilitator does, I'm going to put it in speech marks, does a really rubbish meditation, you know, and which is of course not true, really. It's all about what we're bringing to the cushion, you know. And often I say to people, what are you bringing? Not what are you going to get from this lovely meditation? What are you bringing? And that's the attitude. It's what do we bring to our cushion that we invite people to really get used to, start to look at. So we hear someone speaking and they've got a voice that we don't quite resonate with. Do we not like it? Do we fall into aversion? What are we bringing to the cushion is attitude. And of course, following on from attitude, you've got communication. And again, this is about communicating from the heart space. Even in our emails, how do we communicate? Is it an opportunity to send someone some care, some kindness? And we can do that, I think. Then you got conflict. And this is a really good one, because often we think, oh, in mindfulness particularly, no conflict. No conflict. You know, we got harmony junkies in mindfulness that just don't want any kind of, but actually a high functioning organization embraces conflict and deals with conflict quickly and addresses it with a real forthrightness. So it's not about, you know, a low functioning team, they get stuck in conflict because no one wants to address it. And it's not about that. Then you've got recognition. And again, this is about the representation and recognizing the value of people and what they do and their time spent at work. I'll go quickly through the others. You've got role fluidity, which I just described like for those of you who are aware of football, the Brazilian football team had this wonderful idea once that every player should be able to play in every different position. And it's the same in a high functioning workplace. To break down the hierarchical structures, can we train those who we see maybe as juniors to become and slot in to spaces of supervisors and managers? And really breaking role fluidity and creating opportunity for that. And of course, support. And the big one is trust. The last one is trust. Can we build trust into our businesses and organizations? And Shola talks about this, and he says, trust is probably the highest honor you can bestow on a person. And he says this because he sort of argues between trust and love. But he says, you know, he asks the question, have any of us loved someone we don't trust? You know, so you can love someone and not trust them, but trust is huge. And if we can build deep trust in our businesses and organizations, I think there's potential for real change. So maybe we can give you that to think about.
Okay, so my suggestion is we cancel our plans for the evening. If I can invite you to unshare the screen just so that I can see everyone. Marvelous. So what we're going to ask in your in the breakout groups is, you know, nothing light or easy. What we're going to ask is, having heard what you've just heard, how can you see this being integrated into your work or into your workplaces? So really practical stuff. We've heard so much insight, wisdom, ambition from Dean and Aesha. How can you see this being integrated into your work or your workplace? So we'll put that into a broadcast message as well. I suggest we have two groups. Is that right, Teresa? Actually, should I just hand over to you for this bit, as you know what's going on? And we'll have, I think,
yeah,
it'd be nice to have some time to come back and share your reflections and share them. So if we say 20 minutes and really mean that, so at 7 minutes past, we'll bring you back. Okay.
And sorry, before I go to the breakout rooms, I think, Andrew, will we be asking somebody to potentially just highlight what, so maybe pick a keynote, pick somebody who is happy to just feedback the high points?
Thanks, Teresa. That would be really helpful. Yeah, if you can nominate a spokesperson to just reflect some of your group reflections, that would be super helpful. Obviously, people can pitch in, but what would be great is to have a little bit of space at the end for some questions as well. So brevity, as always, will be key.
And if somebody is happy to sing while I do the breakout rooms, that would be remarkable or tremendous or even fantastic.
Or not, depending on
or not.
Can I just butt in? Just ask a question, Andrew, which is that you know, there's so much there. I would just, I personally, and I'm not sure everybody else, would just love to ask some more questions, and so, you know, although we can take this time to be together, and I think that's really important as well. There's so many sort of aspects to what we've talked about. My head's in a spin a bit. It would just be lovely to have a bit of time to ask some questions to you both, because I think, you know, it's so powerful what you've talked about, and I think it's just, if we could, we could maybe unpack one or two of those things and have the opportunity to do so. I would find that incredibly helpful.
Yeah, of course.
Totally happy with that as well.
That's great. Would people like to have some time to discuss it and reflect first and come back with the questions, or ask a couple of questions up front?
Well, I think there's so much there. I would love to be able to ask, just to sort of explore one or 2 points before we go in, just so we can
just
bring that. That's just my own thought. Sorry.
Thank you. The challenge we always have is time. So I'm going to be bold and suggest that we maybe have 2 questions, very brief, succinct questions, and then we go into the breakout groups, just so you have the chance to have those conversations, and then come back and we'll have more time for questions. And I'm also going to be super bold and say that I will ask Dean and Aesha if they'd be willing to come back on another occasion, because I very selfishly want this to be the start of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. So Chris, it sounds like you've got a question that's burning. So if you can ask a succinct question, and then we'll ask one other person, and then we'll go into breakout groups.
Personally, I find this incredibly powerful, and thank you both very much. What comes out for me is this quality of faith as well. That so much of mindfulness historically is about, this concept of awareness, but what you're doing is absolutely bringing into the center of what mindfulness is about is compassion, which is Christ's message, which is the Buddha's message, which in Islam is so central to it as well. So if I can just ask, where does faith come into all of this? Are you people of faith, and how does that tie in to your experience of mindfulness?
Really nice question, Chris. Thank you for that. Thank you. And it's an interesting one because of our backgrounds, actually. But absolutely, I do feel that anyone that has faith, it does come into it. But I also respect those that don't. From our own personal perspective, like, we've known each other since we were 11, and because we went to the same school. And I'm of mixed heritage, so my dad was a Muslim. He's passed away now, and my mum was brought up a Christian. So I had a very diverse upbringing. I went to the mosque and I went to the church. My granny even had her own church. And then we had Seventh-day Adventists, we had Jehovah's Witnesses, we had it all going on. So faith, I can call myself, maybe I've been on the mobility around faith. That's probably a great way to frame it. And again, Dean can speak about his background, but we had a lot of conversations, even as kids, like, who's going to burn in the fires of hell? So, we can bring our awareness to this as well as adults, and really say, it's about, what are we bringing our awareness to? How are we using our faith? Is it blind faith? Are we being critiquing faith? Is it really resourcing us? So there's different ways that we can even approach faith, but maybe you want to add something.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, we've been having this debate since we were 11 years old, and when we sort of got older and we started to think about the dating world, and it was like, oh, okay,
we were much older.
We were much older than 11, of course, but and we had all these cultural mix going on. It was like, whoa, so Muslim, Christian, okay, no faith. So we had these debates a really long time ago. And what we found was, like you say, Chris, there is a golden thread that runs through all of the key religions, and runs through not just religions, it's also indigenous cultures. It's like mindfulness. Compassion is innate to all of us, and all different demographic groups and faith groups. So the idea of what we do is to invite, if you are coming forth with a faith, that's okay. And also there are gems within every faith. So it's about really utilizing the wisdom in the room. That's what inclusion training is about. It's about utilizing the wisdom in the room. It's not about focusing on faith, of course. It's a secular program that we've designed. However, for those who are interested and do have that interest, it's about inviting that and welcoming that. It's okay, it's fine, and there's wisdom there. I've taken refuge many years ago, and yeah, let's leave it as that. Really,
We're mobile.
we're mobile.
Excellent. I love that analogy. And there was something in what you said which reminded me of that idea that we're not teaching, we're not learning, we're unlearning. That actually this is stuff that we knew to start off with, and we unlearn it, and we have to unlearn all the stuff which is getting in the way of our real lived experience. So one more question before I'm going to throw you, whether you want to or not, into a breakout room. Any other burning question that people would like? Yes, Parveen.
Hi, thanks ever so much for that, Dean and Aesha. Yeah, there was a lot in there, like Chris has said. Yeah, I just had a question about a point that you made at the beginning about the training you're on at the moment, the MSc course, and about, I guess, questioning how mindfulness is taught to mindfulness teachers, and this the notion that it's sort of based on the individual rather than perhaps ourselves, as well as others, the wider community, and our relationship with others. How do you? So how do you think? I mean, this is probably a bit of a big question, but do you think that mindfulness teacher training needs to be taught differently? And if so, how do you think it can be influenced? Yeah, the mindfulness teacher training world. Do you think it needs to change, and how do you think it can be that change can happen?
Yeah, really good question, Parveen. Thank you. And yeah, that's a part of our studies actually, is to look at the teaching of mindfulness and the pedagogy, and how are we, you know, a lot of when we use the MBI tag, what's the relational skills, and so it goes quite in some depth, and I don't want to add more to the plate, but I mean, my simple answer would be, it's for mindfulness teaching needs to be improved. If it's going, you know, I think, and I'm really being careful with my views here, but I think that it's fallen short in being an inclusive way of having an anti-oppression pedagogy, as Beth Barilla would describe it. The pedagogy is not about, you know, it is about teacher-participant relationship. I am the teacher, and I know mindfulness, and I'm going to depart this curriculum on you instead of using the wisdom in the room. And I think that causes a lot of problems personally. And that's coming from experience. But yeah, I definitely think it needs to be, you know, we've created a CPD as well for teachers in this, because I think it's that necessary. Whether it goes anywhere or not, that's another thing.
Yeah, I'd like to quickly just come in on that as well. I'm actually focused in my my studies and my research for my MSc, my final dissertation, is on this very thing. It's done a great job, but it feels a bit like, now what? There's so much more that we could be doing, and I really feel that it needs to be diversified, you know, to reach a broader participants. Well, yeah, it needs broader participants, and also the teaching or the teachers need to be more diverse as well. But with that as well, it's how we're teaching, a bit like what Dean said, you know, this idea of departing knowledge, when there's so much more that we can explore together in the room. And again, coming back to what we mentioned earlier on, this sense of humility seems to have been lost somehow. You know, this idea that we're meant to be professional and have the answers, and we're neutral. We kind of feel like the teacher is never neutral. You're bringing part of your identity, you're bringing your lived experience into the classroom, you know, whether it's online or in an actual space. Part of you is your identity. Part of you is your history, your training. There's so much more to us. So we're not flat in, you know, 2D, we are 3D. So there's a real sense of we need to be a bit more aware of that. and have a bit more humanity and humility in the teacher training. So that would be a short answer of my dissertation.
I'm just going to add to that as well, Parveen, very quickly. This idea of neutrality as a teacher is big in mindfulness. We're coming from this neutral space, and actually, you know, that really isn't the case. And I think that comes from the non-judgment, without preference. We are neutral. Mindfulness is neutral. It's secular, and actually, it's imbued with culture. It's imbued with our authenticity and who we are. But there's a pretending that it's neutral, and that can be really, it's a little bit like, and I hope it's not too challenging to share, but it's a little bit like whiteness sometimes. It's as if it's neutral, and it's not neutral. None of us are neutral. Love and kindness and compassion isn't neutral. So how can mindfulness be?
Thanks for that. Yeah, I really look forward to, if it's possible, to seeing your dissertation once it's done. Yeah, thanks. There's a lot in that. Thank you.
We're queuing up, Parveen, to see this. literary masterpieces. Yeah. So look, I'm conscious of time. We've got half an hour left. Now I'm very happy for if Dean and Aesha are to continue the conversation and just continue with questions, or I'm happy to give people a chance to explore this themselves in groups and come back with some ideas. How would we like to use the next half an hour? Do you have a number of questions that you'd like to ask? Are people sort of chomping at the bit to ask a question, or would you like to have some space to reflect on this?
I think space to reflect would be very helpful, and discussing it between us would be helpful.
Yeah, there's a few nods there. Great. Okay. So Teresa, if you're ready to put people into groups, we'll just have, I'm afraid, somewhere around, I'm going to try and make it 12 minutes so that people have some chance to actually have a conversation. But then I really want to have some time for people to come back, and I am going to end at past because we have other things to do. But as I say, if we ask very nicely, perhaps these wonderful people will come back to us. That's a yes. That's brilliant. Okay, so we'll see you in 12 minutes time.
I'm going to open the breakout rooms now, and be just able to be mindful of everybody in the room, and if everybody's happy to speak as well in the 12 minutes that you have, that would be great, and we look forward to seeing you soon. So I've invited you to join the room. You should have a little thing now. Dean and Aesha and Luke and Andrew, you can go and have a wee break or a cup of tea, or just chill for a moment, or if you like, we can hop you into rooms. Parveen, are you in a room? You're in room 1, Parveen.
You're muted at the moment. Do you want to stop the recording, Teresa, just for a moment?
Certainly, I shall.
So, thank you, Teresa. So, who are our nominated spokespeople? And again, with 17 minutes left, I'm going to invite brevity so that we have some questions and some time for some comments from Dean and Aesha.
So I volunteered myself for group 1 section. Well done, Alex.
I didn't volunteer, I'd just like to point that out, but yes.
Oh,
okay, Maria first then.
So we did talk about the question of workplace, how to take it back into the workplace, but at the moment workplace is still in flux. We're still not in the office. So we don't have those interactions that we typically have in the office at the making a coffee or tea. But in the practice, we do see a golden thread of when we hold mindfulness sessions, there is this golden thread that Dean and Aesha mentioned. We really like that concept of Ubuntu and that seems like a no-brainer and the base of IND, and the concept of not being judgmental. And then we questioned, we all grow up with judgments through our upbringing, and this is not on purpose, and we don't live in a vacuum. So it's just that awareness as well, and integrating that awareness, trying to be aware of our own judgments. And then another mention was, thoughts are like data. We can decide what's useful or not, and we can also apply the same to the judgments, which judgments are useful or not. And we also like that perspective on the teacher. So makes us think. So we're all learning. Alex, the lifelong learning. So Alex,
Indeed.
over to you. We want to make use of our precious time.
Thanks, Maria. I'll be very quick. I'll be very quick. I think we were all really taken back by it. We loved the session first off, Dean, Aesha. Absolutely fantastic, and lots of things to take away and think about. So I think, you know, a lot of time is needed to reflect on this. So we found it quite difficult to answer the question, I suppose. There was lots of reflection back on how it made us feel, and I think we were all blissfully unaware, perhaps, of the fact that this inherent bias that has been brought in through mindfulness teaching, in part because it's been taught by white middle class people to white middle class people for so long. You know, it was developed by white middle class people, so just that inherent bias is there, and knowing that there is that bias there is almost enough to be able to say, right, okay, we need to think about what we're doing. There's Roy brought up a really interesting thing about this path of discrimination. And not discrimination in the sense of, you know, discrimination against race, but thinking about how we use language to make our language and wording our language to be much more inclusive. So thinking about how that can help to implement and change culture. So you mentioned that he's been at this for so many years, and it's always about cultural change. Everything's about cultural change. You go back to the 70s, it was a blame culture, or you know, oppressive cultures. It's always about culture, and what are we actually trying to do with this? So that was some interesting ideas there, watching the language that we use when we're trying to be inclusive, or especially when we're teaching. Another thing that came up was something that Carrie brought up, which I thought was really interesting, was around being aware of the triggers that can come in through a practice and people's lived experience. You will not always be aware of that lived experience, whether that's from a racial background or trauma-based or whatever. So just being aware to be prepared for that, and you know, going back to the point you made earlier on, having humility to accept that, and being, you know, to be able to kind of roll with what comes up and not have all the answers, and just learn from that, you know, the wisdom of the crowd sort of thing. So I thought that was some of the things we came up with. But yeah, just wanted to say loved it. It's fantastic. It was a good discussion as well.
Thanks, Alex and Maria.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Maria and Alex. Very succinct. Really great. So, any questions flowing from either your conversation or now that you've had some time to reflect? Any further questions for Dean and Aesha? Or do you have any responses or reactions to what you've heard, Dean and Aesha?
I think Jenny was just trying to come in first.
If I could, I was just I was interested in the fact that you mentioned trauma, because trauma is you know, far more widespread than we give credit to, and particularly in the light of people's experiences recently and now. And I was wondering how much you found that your learning and use of trauma-based approaches has been called on in the work that you do.
Really interesting question. Thank you, Jenny. And it is really apparent. And again, I'm going to mention Beth Barilla, because her work around oppression and, you know, also recognizing trauma as, you know, oppression and trauma, you know, they meet, they're married. So this idea that, you know, when we're in these spaces, assume that everybody's been traumatized. That makes it instantly safer for everyone. Yeah. And when we come with that sense of humility around that, and again, we may not know how to necessarily deal with it, but understand, you know, it's that same thing of, you know, we have an intention. So our intention may be to hold a space if we're teachers, for instance, or just be at work in a particular role. But sometimes there's there's a glitch between the intention and the impact. And it's just being present to hold the impact. So being aware of trauma, being aware to, you know, have support for someone. If we can guide them in another way or provide them with some direct support. We are not counselors. We don't come from that kind of background, but we certainly come from a lived experience. So we're certainly more socially, how can I put it, socially encouraged. So for us, we're really aware that we don't know what we're going to meet. And for instance, one of the areas within inclusion, so we very much look at different contexts when we're delivering MBIT. So mindfulness-based inclusion training means we can look at specific contexts. As part of our research, we looked at race as one context, but we saw very quickly how uncomfortable people are just talking about race. And instantly it triggers a sense of a memory for most across the board. So not just because you belong to a particular racial group, across the board, race is an issue. You know, how we deal with that, how we look at it. So very quickly people feel take it back to a previous experience. So that in itself needs some delicate holding, really delicate holding.
I think what I would say is when we're looking at trauma and when we're looking at language and discourse, if we have humility and know that we might make a mistake and be there for when that happens, truly, without shame, without blame, without guilt or resentment, be there. Because otherwise, you know, so we do a lot of these sessions and people say, oh, what is it? Is it okay to say this? Is it okay to say that? What about that word? And actually, if we use the language we have, but we have humility with that language and say, look, I might get it wrong. And if I do get it wrong, or if I do, please call it out. And that's using the wisdom in the room. That's using the understanding that's in the space. Otherwise, we then try and create a load of other new discourse, and everyone gets stuck on that discourse. And of course, as soon as we're certain about one thing, we can be certain that we're missing something else. So the thing that I always encourage is to be relaxed and flexible, come from that space of humility. Because I think at the moment, so, you know, mindfulness is sold as being safe. And I could probably reel off 10 different experiences as why it's not safe for everyone anyway. And I really like that idea, Alex, about, you know, context. It's been created for a particular group demographic. Yeah. And, you know, so it's about, and that's okay, actually. That's okay, as long as we own it. Like, you know, and then you say, okay, so what about the LGBTQI community? Is there a different culture there? What about, you know, is there a different culture with gender? You know, and molding and shaping. Mindfulness is beautifully diverse, remember? So is molding and shaping it to the humans that are there, and being humble about the mistakes that we might make. So then we don't need to come from this space of, I know, and I've got it all safe and all packaged. And that just is an arrogance that causes problems. So lastly, I would say, coming back to Jenny's comments about really this idea of trauma, I think we all carry some form of trauma, even if we don't think we do. I think once we start to really look inside and know ourselves, we'll find some kind of, you know, traumatic events that shaped us.
Could I make an observation and a question? I think it relates to what you've been saying. And that is, you mentioned the point of being authentic. I've come from a background of facilitation for many years before I got into mindfulness. And in facilitation, I became very aware of how a lot of people find it very difficult to be authentic when the culture is against some of their fundamental beliefs. And so I found it very helpful as a facilitator to encourage people when they're having difficulty with authenticity to break through I'd say, well, what did you think, Mary? Or what did you, just as part of my mindfulness facilitation skill? So my question to you is, in a way, how do you deal with, or how have you dealt with maintaining authenticity within groups, within the way you're working?
Nice question, Rory. Really nice. Thank you. Have you got something burning coming?
The thing that, well, you know, again, there's so many things I could say. I think what we try to do in our training, firstly, we have it in a community of practice framework, a mindful community of practice framework, but we're coming from a space of becoming comfortable with uncertainty, not knowing. And as we are uncomfortable, we become comfortable with uncertainty, we allow multiple possibility. And that's where the authenticity comes in. Otherwise, we're certain about, you know, my cultural lens. So we really work with, in the body as well, using things like coherent breathing, which addresses the trauma, and working with uncertainty, which then opens the door for limitless possibility.
Thanks, Roy. And also, just to add to that, I think it's really useful, you know, to name things as they happen, because then we're encouraging other voices in the room to name what's happening for them, in the same way, example that you gave, you know, oh, what's happening for you, Mary, or whoever. You know, this idea that we're neutral, we can start to, you know, shift around a bit. Yes, there's a responsibility and a role to hold the space, which may mean that, you know, we're kind of central to that. But at the same time, if we come with a sense of, this is my worldview, when we're, you know, delivering something, or we're sharing our own perspective, this is my worldview from my lived experience based on my background. You know, a big part of our work is about social conditioning and how we've been socialized, and we've all grown in different political times. You know, it's acknowledging even the music that we may listen to. All of these aspects feed into us, you know, whether we are very academic, or maybe we're more into arts, or maybe we're, you know, we're really into nature. These all are parts of us, and this is what we can share authentically, but we need permission to be able to do that as well. But sometimes we need the courage to say, I'm going to share this, and you may not need to agree with me. That's okay. We're not looking for consensual truth, but we are allowing ourselves to speak our truth, if that's okay. So it's that kind of permission to be present with what's alive for us, and also make space for what's alive for other people.
Thank you so much. So we have 3 minutes. I'd love to ask if there's a person whose voice we haven't heard yet, if they've got a comment or a question, which if we have the answer later, that's fine. But anybody who hasn't spoken yet who'd like to say something. Yeah, Gabriella.
Thank you very much, Dean and Aesha. I think it was amazing. It gave me so much awareness about the whole topic you talked. And then even I have a recent experience, just quickly, just to mention that I work now in a small family-owned company, just a couple of people, employees. And I actually experienced trauma already in these couple of weeks I've been there. And then through mindfulness and through the whole idea, actually, which you just been mentioning, it's just so complex. And then it's with dealing with conflicts is assertiveness, is recognizing that there's something triggered, and then how I deal with this. And then I was able to speak up, and then I was able to openly manage the conflict, and in a nice way. And it was just, yeah, it's just so complex. So it's like it was a kind of you know, reflection that whatever it happened in me and happening is just you know, yes. So thank you for sharing it. It was really nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriella. So we are out of time. We have it on video that Dean and Aesha have agreed to come back. So we're really thrilled about that. We are so grateful for your time and finding time in the middle of your dissertations. I think that's a generally held feeling. So perhaps we can show our appreciation in the usual way. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Really,
Marvelous.
really happy
Thank
to
you.
be here. Thank you.